Tom Fitton. He's the president of Judicial Watch and the author of A Republic Under Assault. Tom, great to have you with us.
Hey, good to be with you, Vince.
I can't imagine.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. I can't imagine, just waking up and knowing that some random state attorney general has made it their undying passion to destroy me. But that's the situation Donald Trump finds himself in.
Well, not only that, Vince, you and your family, you and your little dog, too.
Yeah.
And remember, she sued his children. And, this press conference yesterday was prosecutorial misconduct. I'm surprised there weren't campaign signs and a balloon drop in celebration. Mm-hmm. This is a civil lawsuit over a dispute about the valuation of properties, which almost change day by day. And no one's alleged that he wasn't, he got a shady loan and defaulted and, it was all based on fraud. No, right. He was someone who was paying his debts, loans approved by sophisticated banks. And I tell you, if this is the standard by which you'll be targeted for criminal or civil prosecution, because they want a criminal prosecution out of this as well, there's not an American citizen who wouldn't be subject to this type of scrutiny and potential prosecution. Because every line of your mortgage application, for instance, could be subject to criminal scrutiny under this politicized version of the law. And, it's not just in New York. It's in Georgia. You've got the Fulton County left-wing district attorney trying to put people in jail for daring to dispute an election under law.
Yeah.
And going back to New York has an awful history of politicians using law enforcement to target their enemies. And so Ms. James is acting in that tradition. It's clear.
She's a part of a horrendous tradition. And here she is. That audio I played for you at the top, that's all before she became Attorney General. That is where she was making promises that she would abuse the office, that she would go after an American citizen and find a crime in order to hurt them. You think that Donald Trump would have a great case against her. Trump sued her last year, May of this year. A U.S. district judge, Brenda Sanas, threw it out and said that there just wasn't enough evidence that Letitia James was out to get Trump, that she merely, quote, disagrees vehemently with Mr. Trump's political views.
Well, now she's taken this key step of filing a lawsuit, so maybe all that can come back.
Yeah.
The harassment of Trump is without precedent. And, if we had competently run states, you'd have a governor or other senior officials in the state saying this is not appropriate. Same goes down in Georgia. Who's running Georgia that's allowing this jihad to go on against Trump and people around Trump based on a dispute about Fulton County elections? It's incredible. And you have to combine that, and it's no better, frankly, here in Washington, D.C., with this politicized Justice Department and the FBI, arguing over the angels on the head of a pin about the status of records the president had, and trying to make a criminal case out of it. It's a wild abuse, no matter who's doing it or how you slice it.
So I want to get your assessment of how much you think the national Democrat political strategy involves people like Letitia James, because the paperwork dispute with Trump and the Biden administration, they've turned that into the crime of the century. That's the story that they keep telling in all the newspapers and all the broadcasts. And they want the American public to be obsessing over the details and be thinking about Trump as some sort of criminal for this dispute over, paperwork. Meanwhile, Letitia James drops a lawsuit this week, a civil suit, not a criminal prosecution, a civil suit against Trump and his children. I'm looking at the front page of Politico, giant headlines, pattern of fraud and deception. How much involvement do you think national level Democrats, to include the White House, Chuck Schumer, Nancy Pelosi, have in this decision-making process to make this, just ahead of the midterms, to make it all about how Trump's a bad guy and we're going after him?
Well, the radical left, it's been reported prior to this, has focused on, for instance, Garland being more aggressive towards Trump, and lesser politicians like Letitia James are obviously as attuned to that as politicians like Garland. Now, there's an election. In the case of James's case, she filed this lawsuit, for practical purposes, a minute before the election. How is this not election interference? And what is it about this lawsuit that required her to file it before the election as opposed to after the election? And, the idiot boy left say, well, Trump's not running, so it's not election interference. Trump is part of this election just as much as Biden is. And obviously he's heavily involved in getting and trying to motivate Republican and other voters to come out to vote for candidates he supports. It's laughable to suggest that any of this is anything other than political.
Well, and let me add an additional piece of evidence to the argument you're making, which is I've seen news outlets like the Washington Post and the New York Times hemming and hawing over, well, the Justice Department is within the 60 days of the election now, so they might not prosecute Trump right now because it may interfere in the election to go after such a high-profile political figure. So even they are admitting that these are very much about the political stakes, these stories.
Well, and to be fair, even to the New York Times and the Washington Post, they're reporting on this hit job up in New York. They can't even find a there there. I mean, they've actually have in their news stories questions about, well, what's the basis for this? How does this work if none of the banks have been harmed? And, this is obviously a fight about real estate valuations. I mean, anyone who's been involved in buying or selling a house or getting a house refinanced, oh boy, how many different valuations do you hear in that process? And if you pick one, are you committing a crime? If Letitia James decides to come after you, these are dangerous times. And of course, they want people to be afraid and they want people to be concerned. And they want people to maybe not do what they might otherwise do politically in terms of being active for fear of being targeted. And one way to make that signal clear is to go after the leading opponent of President Biden in America.
Let me get your thoughts on this special master, moving to a separate issue, again, the Trump paperwork dispute. There's a judge now sorting through all of this, or attempting to establish where Trump might have attorney-client privilege as well as executive privilege. And this judge, who, again, was suggested by the Trump side, the Justice Department likes him, Raymond Dearie, he is reviewing these documents, but the reporting all suggests that he's been very tough on the Trump team in court. He wants clear answers on whether or not Trump declassified documents, and he wants additionally Trump to back up any claims that the FBI may have planted evidence during the search of Mar-a-Lago, or at least in this case. What do you make of all of this?
Well, I think, President Trump understands what the legal issues are. He was on Hannity yesterday, and I know the left likes to make fun of what he said, no matter what he says, but he's right. All he had to do was take the documents. He didn't need to tell anyone. He just needed to make a mental reservation that these documents are mine, and they were his, and they became declassified. And I don't understand why his legal team isn't as forthright as their client. And, when you want federal judges whose instinct is to back the Justice Department, no matter how abusive they are.
Let me play. Let me play the audio you're referring to, if you don't mind. This is Trump talking to Sean Hannity last night about declassification.
You had said on Truth Social a number of times you did declassify.
I did declassify, yes.
Okay. Is there a process? What was your process to declassify?
There doesn't have to be a process, as I understand it. There's different people say different things, but as I understand, there doesn't have to be. If you're the president of the United States, you can declassify just by saying it's declassified, even by thinking about it, because you're sending it to Mar-a-Lago or to wherever you're sending it. And there doesn't have to be a process. There can be a process, but there doesn't have to be. You're the president. You make that decision.
Okay, so what the left is doing is they're mocking him, saying that he using some sort of magical spell in his brain, he declassified. The point he's making, Tom Fitton, is that by possessing them and taking them with him as president of the United States, you cannot mishandle classified information as president. By expressly taking them with him, he's saying that it's de facto declassified. I obviously knew I was taking them out of the White House and into Mar-a-Lago. That is the intent is obvious.
Well, he is righter than right on that, and you know why? Because that was the Justice Department's position. Because we litigated this very issue over tapes that Bill Clinton had. I've talked to you about this before, Vince. And the Justice Department, these were tapes of him talking to foreign leaders. That's presumptively classified, but he took them with him. And the Justice Department told the court, because we told the National Archives, you should go get them. The National Archives said, no, we don't have to. The court said, no, you can't second-guess the president's decision-making here. And the Justice Department, during a hearing, they told the court, if the president had them, because he has them with him afterwards, after he left office, they're presumptively classified. They're presumptively his and personal.
And by the way, I think the Justice Department knows all of this, meaning...
Oh, of course they do, and they're misleading
time,
and playing games with the court.
Every time it comes up, right? Have you noticed that in a lot of the coverage it's caveated, where the Justice Department is constantly arguing, well, it doesn't really matter if they're classified anyway. That's not really the question. Well, honestly, this politicized Justice Department, if they thought they could get him on a classification issue, do you really think they'd be holding back right now? They know they can't get him on
classification.
classification.
And they're saying he hasn't made the point they're classified, but they're not saying he's wrong to make it.
Right.
And if I were the president's team, I'd be more forthright here. And as I was saying earlier, these judges need to have something to hang their hats on. And, they just have to be direct. And if they should think more the way the president does in their presentations to the courts than trying to kind of have, trying to raise the issue without really being specific as to how that issue applies to these cases.
It's fascinating. Tom Fitton, president of Judicial Watch. Thank you, sir, as always. Good to talk to you.